Good morning. It's Thursday, August 7th, 2014. This is a special broadcast of the I-24 News Morning Edition. Today marks the 31st day since the start of Operation Protective Edge and the third day of a truce intended to lead to a long-term ceasefire. An Israeli delegation is in Cairo to discuss the terms of this long-term ceasefire with Hamas. But Hamas has not accepted a ceasefire extension beyond Friday morning. That's tomorrow at 8 a.m. Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister spoke to the foreign press in Jerusalem, saying it would be, quote, a moral mistake not to hit back at terrorist strongholds in mosques and schools, maintaining that such behavior would represent, quote, an enormous victory for terrorists everywhere and would result in more and more civilian deaths around the world. Earlier yesterday, Israel's army chief, Benny Gantz, stressed that the IDF had struck heavy blows against Hamas, but reiterated that it would act again if necessary and was able to deploy in order to do so. With me in the next half hour is the research fellow in INSS at INSS and the lecturer at Tel Aviv University, Dr. Benedetta Berti. Thank you for joining us. Senior Middle East analyst here at I-24, Ali Waked, and Haaretz senior defense correspondent, Amir Oren. Thank you all for joining us. I wanted to show you quick next report by I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev, and then we'll chat.
Every war or military operation has its top chain of command, the architects of the military and diplomatic battle. Operation Protective Edge, in that respect, is being run by a very visible troika, the Israeli Prime Minister, his defense minister, and IDF Chief of Staff.
The operation will end only when a prolonged period of quiet and security is restored to Israel's citizens.
All along the way, Netanyahu and his comrades have been resolute in setting modest goals, restoring the calm and dealing a harsh blow to Hamas's infrastructure. Accordingly, they adopted a pragmatic and restrained line, fiercely resisting calls to launch a large-scale operation, reoccupy the Gaza Strip, or topple Hamas.
We need to be determined to continue the struggle against a murderous terrorist group that aspires to destroy us.
Numerous polls reveal that the Israeli public is highly satisfied with the performance of Netanyahu, Ya'alon, and Gantz. During the operation, Netanyahu obtained a record 82% popularity. That support has since declined, but the approval figures are still quite respectable. The operation hasn't produced a great victory or a crushing defeat, but Netanyahu's troika did gain points for cool management and avoiding risky adventures.
We will not suffer fire on our civilians and on our community and our children, and Hamas will pay a very high price.
The pragmatic line may have earned esteem from the general public, but could extract a heavy price from Netanyahu's own political camp. Right-wing ministers haven't spared criticism of the leadership's conduct, describing him as a weak leader, reminding the public that in 2009, after Operation Cast Lead, then opposition leader Netanyahu announced that if he were in charge, the army would have gone all the way.
I want to say here and now, we won't stop the IDF. We will complete the work. We will topple the terror rule of Hamas.
With ceasefire negotiations underway in Cairo, Netanyahu is trying to paint a victory narrative, stressing the operation's significant accomplishments, cessation of rocket fire and dismantling of the tunnels. If Protective Edge will result in a long-term calm, Netanyahu will be credited with an enormous achievement. If not, approval ratings are likely to plunge swiftly, and it is only a matter of time before the political contest to replace him begins.
So, Amir, looking back at the past 31 days, it's too early, of course, to say we've ended it. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, the ceasefire is due to end because Hamas has not agreed to extend it. What kind of scenarios can we be prepared for?
It's too early to say it ended because we have to first decide what it was.
Right.
And obviously it wasn't finished by a knockout or a technical knockout, and therefore it's a fight which can go on to 15 rounds. And the gong was heard. The two fighters went out for a respite. The trainers are wiping the blood and sweat off their faces, and they may come back for another round unless the referees who are in Cairo will come out and say that the fight is over. So for Hamas, the unconditional condition is that it disarm eventually. And what Hamas is saying, actually, is that this is supposed to be the end of the Al-Azam, Ezzadin al-Qassam brigades, and they are not going to allow it. Therefore, if it is going to be a condition on Israel's part to go on with the talks, they may fire a round or two, not necessarily into a populated area, in order to show that they are willing to go back to the fight. And Israel will have to decide whether to respond firmly. So yes, tomorrow morning, if there is no extension, we may go back to part of the fighting, not the ground action.
Because on the Israeli internal, perhaps also on the societal level, even in the military, yes, we heard Benny Gantz say he's ready to redeploy if necessary, but the military has completely moved out. Life has been brought back to normal. The Home Front Command told residents of the southern communities, you're able to go back to your home. Are we doing this too soon?
No, it's not too soon, because the whole purpose of the ground action was to act against the tunnels until the outer shell of the urban area in Gaza, and this mission has been accomplished. There is no point in staying in or coming back. It doesn't mean anything regarding the firepower that Hamas still has, the 3,000 rockets or so, and the mortar shells that they can lob against civilian communities, which is the greatest danger, because if civilian residents come back to their homes and find out that life is back to normal in the abnormal sense, they may revolt against the government. So it's a very tense period.
And Ali, looking at it from Hamas's standpoint, obviously it's too early to say what they're going to be doing tomorrow, but would you agree with Amir that they're ready and also to continue their firing of rockets tomorrow after 8 a.m., also to show not only their population that they're ready to still fight, but also to send a message to Israel?
Well, I will continue the example of Amir about the fighters in the arena. The problem for Hamas is that the audience doesn't want to get back to the arena. The Palestinian population sending clear messages that they will not tolerate any more getting back to the fights. And one more problem is that the Palestinian delegation is, beside Hamas accepting the ceasefire, accepting the Egyptian conditions. Yesterday, I talked to one member of the delegation in Cairo, and he said that the Egyptians are showing very hostile attitude and position vis-a-vis Hamas demands, and the Egyptians are almost willing to humiliate Hamas in order, in their terms, not to allow Hamas to translate some military achievements that they marked on the ground in this fight to political success, to political achievements. Hamas, on the other hand, cannot end this round of negotiations without telling the Palestinians that the blockade is on the table, that we started talking the lifting of the blockade, because for the moment there is no talks about lifting of the blockade. There are some measurements that aim to appease the life of the Palestinian in the Gaza Strip, but no big change that will allow Hamas to say we won the battle on the militarily speaking, and now we want also the battle on the political level. All the Palestinian delegation is against getting back to the fire and to the fighting. Even the Islamic Jihad is not enthusiastic to get back to the fighting, and Hamas is standing alone in this position. And I don't see Hamas going against two elements: the Palestinian population that got back to their homes, or demolished home, or partially demolished home. Hamas is well aware of the crisis in the Gaza Strip. You know, when you go and try to rent a house, because your house was demolished in the Gaza Strip, you are paying now twice or three times higher than it was before the war. So there is a very tended situation in the Gaza Strip.
But they still don't blame Hamas, as we heard also yesterday.
Yeah, they don't blame Hamas, but they don't want to get back to the refugee centers. First, they were targeted by the Israeli army. Tension between families. You know, more than 200,000 Palestinians, or 250,000 Palestinians in 80 schools. Yeah, it's crazy. And Hamas is well aware that the Palestinian population do not want to go back to 3 days before. Now, we saw that Hamas calculations never took really into consideration what the population needs and want. But this time,
just imagine staying with your mother-in-law for 3 days. That's tension enough.
Yeah, I had one friend that told he was also hurt in this war because he had to pass the 3 days with the mother-in-law. But when Hamas sees what the Egyptians want, what the Palestinian delegation want, and the Palestinian delegation, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, are doing some measures towards Hamas when they said that we are going to lead the Palestinian campaign to go to the international court and accusing Israel for war crimes, etc. So I don't see Hamas getting back to the fire. It is true that the military wing of Hamas is has some different interests than the political leadership of Hamas. But at the end of the day, I think that there will be an extension for more couple of days that will allow Hamas somehow to get back to the Gaza Strip, saying that there was some political achievement. There is a schedule to talk about the lifting of the blockade, etc.
And Benedetta, a report in this morning's Al Haram, I believe it's Al Haram, maybe you'll correct me, saying that Hamas is willing to put their demands of a seaport and an airport on the hold for the meanwhile, understanding that that's not going to be the best or perhaps the most viable thing that Israel is willing to give them right now. What other demands do you know that is maybe negotiable, something that can be spoken about? Obviously, Israel's not going to build an airport at this time.
Right. Well, on the seaport, actually, yesterday they said that was one of the demands they were not willing to negotiate. Right. Now it's changing tune. So that indicates that it's very flexible on that level, meaning that there is internal conversation as to what the priorities are. But that can be conceived as one of the most difficult demands to achieve. The prisoners is something that is very thorny, because in the past round of negotiation it was raised and then dropped. That was the case for Kaslet, and in the last round it wasn't really one of the main demands. So I think realistically that would be one of the demands they would have to reconsider in order to move forward with the ceasefire. But that would raise internal debate as well. I mean, the package deal, the basis. I would say the minimum concession that Hamas would need to accept in order to move forward is, at the very minimum, going back to the terms of 2012, which meant talking about a gradual normalization of the crossings, including talking about Rafah and who's going to stay there, as well as normalizing the influx and outflux of goods and people. People talk a lot about what gets into Gaza. Even more important to Hamas is what gets out of Gaza, so exports and reintegration with the West Bank. This will be at their minimum. The extension of the fishing area, that's also something very important to the local economy and to the local fishermen. That's something that in 2012 Israel did initially agree to. They doubled the nautical miles that were allowed for Gaza fishermen. That's also something that would have to be included. I think that's the minimum level. But then and I think that's where it gets a little bit more messy. There's a lot of conversations within Hamas. So there's those who are sitting now in Cairo, but there's also those who are not there. And that's even more significant because Egypt did indeed not signal that they did not want in the delegation very important pieces of the puzzle, including the military leadership, including Khaled Mashal, even more important, who was not invited to be part of this process.
Was he implicitly not invited?
Yes. This is what my conversation as reported to me, my sources, so to speak. So my sense is that Egypt has been quite clear as to who they want to talk with Hamas, and that's very important because they're trying to participate in the internal conversation. They chose Marzouk, who's someone who's already living there, who has been rising in his career, so to speak, in the last year, and who has a very, I would say, decent conversation with Egypt, certainly better than what Mashal or Arnia can have, because the relationship there is very, very strained. So it is representative, but very important parts of Hamas are missing. They're going to send messages, and they're going to make sure they don't end up marginalized or they don't end up on the side of the deal. So it's very fluid.
2 points, Yael. One, that it's true what she's saying. We saw it last Friday when there was a ceasefire, when the political level was engaged to a ceasefire, and the military wing did not accept it. This is one thing.
Rafah,
but second, Hamas nightmare is getting back to the 2012 understandings, because it means that
Nothing
we were
has been
there
achieved,
and nothing was achieved, and the Palestinian population will start asking the question. Already the Hamas arms is starting to be a beginning of a discussion among the Palestinian elite, the Palestinian media, because the equation is Hamas arms versus the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, and Hamas cannot accept getting back to the 2012. In this case, it will prefer really to continue fighting even against the will and the position of most of the Palestinian factions, including the Islamic Jihad, and endangering the last tie with the Palestinian population, with the Palestinian consensus.
Even the Israeli side, though, is not looking only at the 2012 ceasefire proposal as something that they can live with. They're talking about demilitarization, and so is the U.S.
Well, they talk about it as a vision, as something to hope for, but it's really wishful thinking, not only because, as Adina Kassam is not going to disarm itself and become only a political party or a group of veterans speaking about previous wars. The singling out of Musa Abu Marzouk is very important because he is the most westernized of the Hamas leadership. He has studied in the United States. At one time he had American citizenship. Whether he renounced it or not is not known, but he was involved in an extradition case back in the 90s, and he could be, at least to some naive Western eyes, the sort of Hamas Salam Fayyad, an expert who spent time, yes, it's ludicrous, but he is, to Western eyes, much better than Khaled Mashal and obviously Ismail Haniyeh and others. But,
Meaning it's intentional?
he is more amenable to Western reasoning.
It's an intentional that by the West to...
Well, it's not really the West, because it's General Sisi who insisted on disinviting...
With perhaps American background held.
Right. However, the Israeli delegation is also important, because as a backup to the known members of the delegation, and whether they are in Cairo or in Tel Aviv is almost immaterial, are two important generals on the IDF general staff. The planning branch chief, Major General Nimrod Shefer, who is in charge of planning the security requirements of Israel. He is an Air Force general. And perhaps even more important, Major General Yoav Poli Mordechai, the coordinator in the territories, who is well-versed in all matters Palestinian. He was in charge of handling the population first in Gaza until 2005, and then in the West Bank. He was the military's liaison to Salam Fayyad when he was the prime minister, and he also knows Mahmoud Abbas, and he is the kind of mindful officer who knows how to take care of the humanitarian matters along with the security demands. So the involvement of General Shefer and General Mordechai is a good sign.
So can we perhaps draw conclusions that Khaled Mashal is perhaps on his way out against his own will because there are going to be forces trying to push him out?
I think that's a bit premature. I mean, even if it's correct to say that Marzouk has been put in a position in which is the face in the context of the negotiations, first of all, we have to see if they end somewhere. And we already mentioned that there are a few sticking points. The prisoners, the 10-point plan as it is, of course, is a non-starter for Israel. And then, of course, it was mentioned 2012. Now, Hamas cannot go back to 2012 because in 2012 the deal was written and never implemented. But the deal, if the deal would have been implemented, then it would have been a big change of scene in Gaza, which of course didn't happen, which is the problem. But the terms per se were a good basis to go on. But so we don't know if that's going to work. If that's going to work, it's definitely going to empower Marzouk for being, if he's able to bring the organization behind it, which is not clear. But then we are forgetting one important aspect, which is the financial aspect. Egypt can broker. Egypt can provide a political background. Egypt doesn't have any money. Hamas needs quite conspicuous financial resources, especially right now. I don't see Mashal being the link with Qatar being thrown out of the window at this particular point. I don't think Hamas has that many regional partners, allies, or countries it can talk to. I think it's going to continue to leverage its relationship with Turkey, but much more importantly with Qatar. Mashal is a key to that. and he has very, I think, still an influential role within Hamas. So I don't see him going anywhere.
This financial aspect of Khalid Mashal was the reason why Khalid Mashal was re-elected the head of the political bureau of Hamas, although in the internal elections in Hamas, he didn't score the biggest result among the leaders of Hamas. This is one thing, and Hamas needs Khalid Mashal links to Qatar. This is one thing. The second thing, Yael, in Hamas, there is a huge discussion. First of all, we do remember that officially Hamas gave up the rule in the Gaza Strip 2 months ago to the Palestinian Authority, and now they are negotiating as they were the patrons of the Gaza Strip. Hamas, in any case, doesn't want to stay the ruler of the Gaza Strip. Hamas understood that it was much higher than their resources, than their capacities, and then the agenda. In Hamas, there was a strategic decision. We are getting back to the results. Hamas sources told me that we're not sure that we are going to participate in the election that were supposed to be held 6 months after the reconciliation agreement, and they hope that when Israel will say Jerusalem will be out of the elections, we will not. This is the reason for Hamas to say we're not participating in the elections until Israel will change its mind. And I don't see this current government in Israel allowing the Palestinians organizing elections in East Jerusalem.
Right.
So in Hamas there were many streams, many trends that wanted to bring back the organization to the jihad. They saw what they lost for the Islamic jihad in popularity terms. Hamas was accused for corruption. Hamas was accused in falling in love with the power and with the privileges that the power and the budgets gave them. And I think that they want to save the last credit that they had in the population. This is why they are raising the issues of the ports, airports, and seaport, because Hamas want to say to the population this round was not in vain. We did achieve something. They know that at the end of the day, the Egyptians will not support any Hamas presence in the borders, and that for the Egyptians, the Palestinian Authority is the address for the whole Gaza Strip as a start for negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority about all the Palestinian cause, and not only about the Gaza Strip. And these are the messages that the Saudians and the Egyptians sent to the Americans and to the Israelis, that Gaza is only a starter for the continuation.
We're going to get a quick update now from I-24 News correspondent Michal Divon. Michal, you're on the Israeli-Gaza border this morning. What's the latest from there?
Good morning, Yael. So another quiet day on the third day of the 72-hour ceasefire. It seems as though business is as usual. Things are coming back to normal. There was traffic on the streets when getting here. But I think most citizens living in this area know better than to be hopeful or to think that this will continue forever. They've been used to a different kind of reality. Now, let me give you a better picture of where we're standing at the moment. We're in Nativ Asara. This is the closest community to the Gaza border. It's 1 kilometer away. Some of the houses reach even closer to that. So the other communities, when you speak about the number of kilometers, here they're talking and counting meters to the Gaza border. Now, behind me, you can see Gaza in the distance, and also some of the agricultural fields. Some of the agriculture here has been highly affected. Most of the time of the operation, there was complete prohibition to enter into the fields. However, some of the houses reach even closer than the fields. So there's kind of confusion within the citizens and residents living here, who many of them feel abandoned by the country at this time. Now, there's been an operation room handling the situation and dealing with residents throughout these past 3 weeks. And we spoke with them this morning, and they said that residents are in no hurry to return here, but there is a feeling that routine is getting back in place. Another important point is that both the IDF and the Palestinian side, based on reports and Facebook, etc., are speaking of a victory. Each side seems to think that they have won the battle or reached their goals. However, the real victims, I think, of the past 3 weeks are the citizens of both sides, who are now coming back very, very closely and cautiously to their homes, and hoping that this silence continues.
Michal Divon, I-24 News correspondent there on the Israeli-Gaza border. Thank you for joining us. Amir.
May I follow up on 2 points, one by Vendetta and one by Ali? Just to collaborate with Vendetta in coining a phrase, Egypt is the broke broker. So it will have to be assisted, and not only it facilitates the talks, but it too should enjoy the benefits of more Western and perhaps other Japanese involvement in the Middle East in order for its economy.
For an incentive also to continue.
To be reconstituted. Now, regarding the prisoner issue, there is an interesting interplay here. Israel could try to play one Palestinian faction against the other. For instance, if it says, fine, we're going back to the fourth batch that Netanyahu did not give Abu Mazen, we are going to release those prisoners and not the 50 or so Hamas operatives who were rearrested in the West Bank following the abduction of the 3 Israeli youth. On the other hand, if Israel believes that Hamas could start firing again because its prisoners were not released, Israel could think about it again, could reconsider, because the prisoner issue is not as salient right now for Israel as it was right after the abduction. After the abduction, the object was, first of all, retribution, and then a bit of deterrence. You in Hamas must remember that if you kidnap our guys, you can pay and we can go back on the Shalit deal. Now, after the operation, this is not so important, and the prisoner question on both sides, abduction and rearrest, is in the backdrop.
So, Ali, if we can say the best scenario deal for Hamas until tomorrow at 8 a.m. is for Israel to agree to some lifting of the blockade, if I take all of the demands that we've heard about this morning?
The problem is not with Israel as it is with the Egyptians. The Egyptians are doing everything in order to try to exclude Hamas from any future arrangement. The Egyptians are trying to exclude Hamas from the political arena in the Gaza Strip, or at least from the decision making in the Gaza Strip. And this is a problem that even the Palestinian Authority delegation, the Fatah delegations, are complaining that this hostility between Hamas and the Egyptians are influencing the negotiations. And I want to say one more thing. The Egyptians are already preparing the map of the Gaza Strip, even in the Palestinian Authority. For example, Palestinian sources close to Abu Mazen are sure that Mohammed Dahlan is in behind the scene advising the Egyptian delegation what should be the arrangement. The Egyptian leadership doesn't believe that the current Palestinian leadership is capable to deliver what they expect from the security measures.
Taking control over the Gaza Strip.
Taking control of the Gaza Strip. This is why the Egyptians have much firmer position than the Israelis about the security arrangements.
Thank you all for joining me this morning. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more from the I-24 News Morning. Welcome back to I-24 News Morning Edition special broadcast this morning. It is day 31 since the beginning of Operation Protective Edge. With me still in studio is a research fellow of the INSS and a lecturer at Tel Aviv University, Dr. Benedetta Berti. Thank you for staying with us. The diplomatic correspondent for Channel 10 News here in Israel, Moav Vardi, thank you for being with here. And Elad Nir, the foreign affairs editor of Channel 2. I want to start diplomatically speaking. I'll start with you, Moav. Yesterday we heard both from the President of the United States, also from the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister now, of Israel, of course, he spoke to the foreign journalists, and using in his speech, he used some kind of videos and so forth to kind of convey the Israeli perception, meaning he's now on a new PR tour, if you will, of what happened.
Yes. And
he hasn't spoken until now that much to the foreign journalists.
Yes, right. Israel, after, seizing the fire itself, Israel now is in a campaign for legitimacy, and a campaign to, I would say, to hold off what seems to be an attack by the legal effects of the campaign in Gaza. First of all, in terms of political campaign, you've seen yesterday in the UN General Assembly a very, very, I would say, strong language against Israel, against what seems to be a breach of international law by what allegedly is attacking UN institutes in Gaza during the operation. You see Ban Ki-moon using strong language that this thing has to be investigated. You see the EU ambassador saying that these things has to be investigated, and Israel is in a campaign. But it's not only political, it's also legal. You know, the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva had appointed or announced a new inquiry committee to see if there was any breach of international law by Israel in Gaza. Now, you must remember, Yael, the Goldstone report after Operation Cast Lead. Now, Goldstone was only a fact-finding mission, while this committee is going to be an inquiry mission with much more, I would say, teeth. In order to make
because it comes after Goldstone, of course.
Because it comes after Goldstone, and I think that in Israel there is a growing understanding that this committee, or this I would say inquiry committee that will come sooner or later to Gaza might lay down the infrastructure, the platform for future demands for legal prosecution against Israelis, from Prime Minister down to the to the brigade commander in Gaza. That's why Israel now in a campaign, both ways. First of all, PR, as Netanyahu convening yesterday the foreign reporters in Israel, showing them the case of Israel, saying that Israel has no choice, because in order to stop the Hamas from firing rockets at Israel, it has to target where those missiles has been shot from, and this has been done from within civilian populated.
We're going to take a
areas.
quick look at the Netanyahu statement from yesterday to the foreign press. Let's take a look.
We're prepared for any chance for the ceasefire to be violated. The Israeli army is deployed in the field in buffered numbers to provide an answer in the event of any scenario. In any event, around the Gaza border, area forces will remain that were not there before the campaign, and that it is in order to provide better security to residents of the region. The security situation of residents of the region is better and more secure than before the campaign.
I think the Secretary's statement on demilitarization as a strategic long-term goal is very important. I think he's right that there are opportunities now, perhaps opportunities that we've not seen before, with a realignment of important parties in the Middle East to be able to fashion a new reality, one more conducive to the end of violence, to the establishment of calm, sustainable peace, or at least a sustainable quiet, which can lead to other things.
Arad, we've spoken throughout the operation about the legal implications, and it's obvious that the Prime Minister has taken them, as Moav said, very much into account. He's looking at Goldstone, but he's also talking to the foreign press immediately and saying, he also said in the same press conference, now that the foreign press is leaving Gaza, we'll get a bigger picture, meaning there's a whole new operation on the ground in that sense.
Yes, this is part of the propaganda machine, or the, how should I call it, the campaign after the campaign. You know, the perception in Israel is that the military campaign is over. I hope it's right. I don't know, some of the messages that come out of Cairo claim different. I don't know whether it's a trick, a negotiation trick, or whether there's some substance in it. This remains to be seen. But coming back to your question, well, there's no doubt that many journalists that come out of Gaza talk about the fact that the Hamas is launching the rockets, or was launching the rockets from within civilian population. Now, I think I'm a very small legal expert. I'm not a legal expert, and the Israeli propaganda machine calls it human shields. That the foreign journalists coming out of Gaza prove now that Hamas is using the civilian population as human shields. This is not what they say. They say that the rockets are launched from within civilian population,
right.
from inhabited areas, which is quite different, at least as far as I understand the legal wording of the fact. When you come to check the area, the topography of Gaza, there are not many hills and mountains in which after which you can hide in order
right.
to use it. So I heard
Netanyahu also mentioned mosques and schools. It's not only within the civilian population. He specifically puts it.
Yes, he did. I'm talking about the language of the journalists
right.
coming out. So this is part of this legal battle that starts now. The Israeli side wants to start with this perception that it's human shields, which is perceived differently by the legal language than civilian population. Because some of the legal experts that I was talking to during the last couple of days, they claim that the international law states the fact that even if you react towards this kind of things, you have to do it in proportionality. You have to keep the proportionality. And, as I keep on saying, these pictures that come out of Gaza are not working towards the claim of proportionality.
Netanyahu addressed that as well
Israel is
yesterday.
being accused now and again, and it's not the first time, that it has the right to defend itself, but it has to do it in some kind of proportionality, which is lacking, especially in this last operation.
Benedetta, we spoke a lot about Hamas's role in Cairo and within its own population. Will Hamas be looking towards, legal implications, world opinion now to also gain more support, or they understand that they have a first some kind of they have to go back to their population with some more demands from Cairo and not worry about what the international world is thinking?
I think Hamas sees everything as very much connected. And I think when we talk about public opinion and you talk about public relations, that's something that they've been doing from day one of the confrontation, and even, of course, well before. Hamas always talks to the international community. For example, after winning the elections, they had an entire planned campaign in which you had very prominent members of the organization, from Ania to Mashal, writing op-eds in Western newspapers. But on this particular time, then you can see very consistent messages being delivered to the international community through social media, through Facebook, through Twitter. What the messages are? The messages are that Israel is violating international law by targeting civilians. The message is, of course, one of the images that Hamas very much plays on is the image of asymmetry in the conflict, and the image of Israel being an almighty army against, of course, a much weaker adversary. And then, of course, there is the economic message, which has been underlined and very strong from day one, which is Hamas is trying to change the situation in Gaza, because the situation in Gaza is already untenable. So the damage, of course, today, it's very difficult today for Hamas to stand tall and continue with this message, given the additional damage that has been done on Gaza. But there is something that resonates within the population when Hamas says, since 2007, we've been living under siege, and we need to change that situation. And Hamas's message is the only tool Israelis understand is violence. That has been their case for jihad from day one, the political one. Of course, there's a religious discourse as well, but that's not towards the international community.
Right.
That's towards the whole community.
This message has been proven right now and again.
I would say, I wouldn't disagree with that particular assessment.
Unfortunate assessment, yes.
But some would also argue that we in Israel are over-exaggerating the threat or the isolation that Israel is about to go into, especially when we talk about the U.S. relationship with Israel, saying, that we've maybe underestimated the strategic ally that we do have. I want to show you U.S. President Barack Obama, who spoke last night at a news conference, and hear what he had to say.
I also think it is important to remember that Hamas acts extraordinarily irresponsibly when it is deliberately siting rocket launchers in population centers, putting populations at risk because of that particular military strategy. Now, having said all that, I've also expressed my distress at what's happened to innocent civilians, including women and children, during the course of this process, and I'm very glad that we have at least temporarily achieved a ceasefire. The question now is how do we build on this temporary cessation of violence and move forward in a sustainable way. The U.S. goal right now would be to make sure that the ceasefire holds, that Gaza can begin the process of rebuilding, and that some measures are taken so that the people of Gaza feel some sense of hope, and the people of Israel feel confident that they're not going to have a repeat of the kind of rocket launches that we've seen over the last several weeks.
Moav, this, of course, comes after a day after Kerry reiterated that the call for demilitarization is also something of a U.S. interest, not only of an Israeli interest.
Yes, of course. I think that in this particular thing, there is kind of alignment between Israel and the U.S. interest, of course, I mean, as it looks on now on the paper before it take into reality. And that is some kind of equation that the, rehabilitation of Gaza and, putting the amounts of money and material needed now in Gaza in order to, to being, some kind to being a civilized place again after the devastation that it has been gone through, must come within a very, very effective monitoring of what comes into Gaza in order to make sure that those sacks of, concrete and money are not used to tunnels and rockets, but to its original purpose, which is building, schools and residents and so forth. Now, I think that this is where Israel and the U.S. are aligned. You see yesterday the European major countries, it is Britain, Germany, and France, suggesting that their troops, their EU troops, will be part of this mechanism in the Rafah crossing, taking care that this, material is not going to be used to tunnels and rockets. And you see that the international community as a whole agrees with Israel's argument that now something has to be changed in that.
So have we over-exaggerated the shaky relationship between Israel and the United States throughout this operation?
There is a shaky relationship.
It's a personal shaky relationship and not a strategic one.
It's a personal shaky relationship. I think that President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu, at least we can say that they had not managed to come over their well-known bad chemistry. I would say that nothing has been changed that way. I think that after all, what President Obama just related to is this kind of equation. Okay, I want to see Gaza in prosperity. I want to see Gaza to be open to the world economically, but at the same time, we need to make sure that this process is not going to take its toll over Israel's security.
Which is not different from the Israeli position.
Yes, but I think that, it depends when you look at it from Sderot, it's different when you look at it from Washington.
Right.
So for Israel, it's security. Let's see what we can do. For Obama is this situation that the Gaza civilians are under siege, are underprivileged in terms of economical and humanitarian needs, is not sustainable. This is a fact. Now let's see how we can deal with the security needs of Israel when we have to help those people in Gaza. Right. The Israel version is upside down. First of all, we have to talk about security. Let's see within security what we can do in order to help the Gazans, the people in Gaza. This I think will be the dispute now. But I think there is a fairly chance that after all in Cairo we would see a more effective monitoring mechanism in Rafah crossing and elsewhere in order to take care that those materials that coming in order to rebuild Gaza is not used after all to terror means.
Benedetta?
Well, I think that there's also different ways of seeing this disparity. It can be seen security versus economic development, or it can also be seen as short term versus longer term, meaning that I would argue that the situation of instability and unsustainability in Gaza is part of the reason why there are current armed confrontation and armed clashes between Hamas and Israel. So
it starts further. It's
I
the chicken
think
and the
there's
egg,
something
basically.
deeper that is rooted in a lack of political process. But on the disarmament, which I think is becoming a very attractive buzzword in the last few days, I think there are some elements of disarmament which are definitely more concrete and implementable, such as the idea of monitoring. And it's something that in principle Hamas can agree to. In the past few weeks, they have mentioned that they would agree to the Palestinian Authority presence in Rafah, which it's to be seen if that would be enough for Egypt, but that's a different situation. So monitoring is the part of disarmament that I think it's something it can be talked about in Cairo. But the problem with talking too much about disarmament without defining it is that it can also become a hurdle and obstacles towards actually getting to an agreement, and then it can also create the very, very serious implementation process, which is going to go around Gaza demanding Hamas to give up its weapons, certainly not the international community. So maybe we'll be left with some vague reference to disarmament like after the 2006 war with Lebanon, with UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which said Hezbollah needs to be disarmed. Of course, everybody knew no one wanted or was able to disarm Hezbollah. And on the other hand, if someone were to put a lot of pressure on the PA to disarm Hamas, well, that would put the PA in a very difficult position, given the fact they're
maybe in an impossible position, given the fact that they're not being supported by much.
Not supported, their legitimacy is already shaky as it is, and you be putting an additional pressure on what is a shell of an organization that is already undergoing a pretty rough period, and you would also risk igniting further strife within Palestinian population, which I'm not necessarily sure that is something that in the long term leads to more stability, which again is also more security for Israel.
Right. Marv?
Yes, I think that a major problem that we are facing now, and we have been talking about it all over since the operation has been started. Egypt is not only a mediator. Israel is part of the confrontation. Mm-hmm. Egypt, I mean, General Field Marshal, no, Al-Sisi, Field Marshal Al-Sisi, the president of
now
Egypt.
President, yeah.
Now president, now president. He is not only brokering or mediating Israel and Hamas demands, right? He has his own demands, which is sometimes more harsh and more strong than Israel's demands. You know, Al-Sisi doesn't like Hamas more than Israel doesn't like it, maybe, to say, in a very common language. But
let's say that Hamas is more of a threat on Sisi than it is a threat on Israel.
There you go. And then Sisi is willing to play tough with Hamas.
Right.
But the thing is that he is playing tough on Hamas while Israel is paying the price.
Right.
You know, all over Operation Protecting Edge, Sisi said to Hamas, no, I'm not going to talk with you unless you hold fire. No, I'm not going to give you Rafah crossing. No, I'm not going to give you wages to the military arm fraction.
But
and Israel, it's like, we have a saying in Hebrew, I'll try to translate it, that Sisi is willing to fight Hamas over the last tip of blood of the Israeli soldier in Gaza. Yeah. You know what I mean? And this is a problem because now Israel is not everything is about Israel now. Okay,
but sometimes in his own
so
internal
having heard
conflict,
all that, Moav, maybe it's wrong of Israel to put all its card in the Egyptian court.
Yeah, maybe, but I think that
maybe they are not the impartial mediator that we need.
Right, Arad, but imagine that. I mean, if we think about the alternatives, Qatar, Turkey, it will be on the cost of showing a cold shoulder to Sisi. And Sisi is a major interest of Israel. I mean, to maintain good relations with Egypt, with Sisi's Egypt, is the most stable thing. And there is no higher interest for Israel. So as Israel, you don't want to insult Sisi. You don't want to convey Sisi the sense that you are not with him because you need Sisi more than you need the Qatars and the Turks.
But Sisi is also, of course, very interested in the Palestinian cause as a whole, and that's something that maybe Israel cannot abide to right now at this time.
I'm not sure. I think that Israel will be to say the least, to review its opinion or its policy.
Said he would be willing to give them a role in the process. That was the word he used yesterday at the press conference.
I'm talking about the reconciliation government. The reconciliation government that Netanyahu did everything he can, in order to to make it gone. To say
ruin it. To ruin it.
To ruin it. To say it's not legitimate. To say Abu Mazen, look, you have to choose.
He's going to have to backtrack then.
Either you're going with the reconciliation government or you're going with us. Now, apparently, the reconciliation government might be part of the solution that will serve Israel's interest. How? Because this technocrat government, or whatever it is, this reconciliation government, might enable Abu Mazen forces to be deployed in Rafah crossing, to be deployed inside Gaza in civilians corps, like, police, civilian police, and so forth. And this is a major interest by Sisi. Sisi is demanding that from Hamas, that Abu Mazen will be part of the solution. And for Israel, it's not so bad. It might serve Israel's solution, but at the cost that now Netanyahu and the Israeli government will have to review its position towards the reconciliation government and say, look, it's something that we can cope with.
What about stop playing hide and seek and negotiating directly with Abu Mazen regarding the solution in Gaza? Is this an option?
Maybe not politically viable right now.
That's a very good thing. I think that people in the government, like Tzipi Livni, is arguing the same cause, that without a direct negotiation, with this trilateral talks with the American inside, with Martin Indyk, with John Kerry. I mean, if you want to negotiate, you need to direct negotiate.
If you want a solution, if you want to negotiate, you can negotiate. If you want to solve the problem, then you need some other means.
Right. What the right said it. I totally agree with you.
Maybe what they want to is just negotiations, but the only question, or the main question, is what's going on the other side. As I said, as I told you yesterday, Yael, it takes two to tango. Right. It takes two to deterrence. It takes two to negotiate. Now, Israel still tries to set up the rules. It does it quite effectively in the battleground. Right. There's no doubt about this. The question is whether Israel will be able to set the rules now in the negotiating table, and still, we've got less than 24 hours to see whether the Hamas is willing to play the game as Israel sets it or not.
Well, you mentioned Egypt as perhaps being an impartial broker, and we know the United States is involved, maybe not on the front lines, but they are involved behind the scenes. Turkey and Qatar that Moav mentioned, is Turkey still involved in some ways because their interests are still there?
Well, Turkey tries to give up the impression that it is involved. Turkey does support Hamas morally. Mm-hmm. Turkey does represent Hamas internationally, but there is no viable Turkish representation in Cairo. The phone calls between Cairo, Doha, and Ankara are ongoing, but no more than this. And this is, in the Turkish eyes, very unfortunate, since this does not enable them to substantiate their position again as a regional superpower, which they are. But in a few days, in 3 days, there will be the elections in Turkey. Maybe as we come out of the elections, things will change in the Turkish attitudes towards the region. And mind you, maybe Moav can help us on this. During all his statements recently, Prime Minister Netanyahu did not mention Turkey even once. He bashed Doha, he bashed Qatar, he did not bash Turkey, for better and for worse. Maybe after Erdogan's statements against Israel and comparing it to Nazi Germany and to Hitler, maybe Netanyahu just ignores the mere existence of Turkey, or maybe he recalls that in 3 days' time, things are going to change in Turkey, and maybe he leaves an opening to still using Turkey in this whole assembly.
So 2 points. First of all, in the press conference 2 weeks ago, I asked Prime Minister Netanyahu how does he relate to Erdogan's remarks about Hitler and so forth. He he used a very strong language. He said that this language, but Erdogan fits to North Korea, or to Iran, or to Nazis. It doesn't seem like a language used by
this was about his statements, not about Turkey's involvement in the negotiations.
Right, and I will tell you 2 stories. First of all, yesterday, and you are a much better expert than me for Turkey, the Turkish Foreign Minister Davutoglu said something about the cooperation with Israel, Egypt, and Turkey to have some kind of humanitarian air train.
This is functioning all these days from day one. There's they call it an air train coming from Turkey to Gaza through Israel, not through Egypt, not directly. It's the Israeli airports that this material comes through, this humanitarian aid from day one. It's medicine, it's blood samples, it's food. Everything comes from Turkey through Israeli airports, then on the ground to the crossings and into Gaza.
No, I mentioned that first of all, you see Dautulu. Talking about Israel in a positive way, or not cursing us. This is good news. First and
well,
second,
Dautulu never cursed us during this campaign.
During this campaign,
no. It's mere Erdogan. It's
no. And another story, a very interesting story, supporting what Arad is just saying. In this famous Friday evening that Kerry has sent his proposal to Israel, and then the Israeli cabinet denied it and said that Kerry's proposal is like a Qatari Hamas proposal. I know the story goes like that. Kerry phoned Netanyahu a day before and tell him, okay, I want to go for a 7 days humanitarian ceasefire with you, Israel, being able to taking care of the tunnels. Netanyahu said, okay, go for it. Kerry went, and Friday morning, Kerry is phoning Netanyahu up and saying, look, the Egyptians cannot deliver this with Hamas. They have a bad relationship. Can I, Kerry, go to the Qatarians and ask them to try and go to it? And the American source tells that Netanyahu told Kerry, do it. Go to the Qatarians and do it. Try to broker whatever you can. And then the rest is history. Kerry went to the Qatarians, went back to Netanyahu with this proposal, which is not an American proposal. It's something like a framework. And Netanyahu, all the ministers in the cabinet trying to talk crazy language about this is unacceptable, and the rest is history. But this story resembles or indicates that Netanyahu in some way knows, or at least acknowledge, well aware to the role that Qatar has to play in the day after, because the money comes from Qatar, and Gaza needs now tons of money.
And that is definitely it's not going to come from Egypt. Thank you, Moav. Thank you, Arad. Benedetta, thank you. We'll be back after the headlines. Good morning. Thank you for joining us once again here at I24 News Morning Edition. It's Thursday, August 7th, 2014. This is a special broadcast. Today marks the 31st day since the start of Operation Protective Edge and the third day of a truce intended to lead to a long-term ceasefire. An Israeli delegation is in Cairo to discuss the terms of the ceasefire with Hamas, but Hamas has not accepted a ceasefire extension beyond Friday morning. Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister spoke to the foreign press in Jerusalem, saying it would be, quote, a moral mistake not to hit back at terrorist strongholds in mosques and schools, maintaining that such behavior would represent an enormous victory for terrorists everywhere and would result in more and more civilian deaths around the world. Earlier yesterday, Israel's Army Chief Benny Gantz stressed that the IDF had struck heavy blows against Hamas, but that it would act again if necessary and was deployed to be able to do so. Still with me in studio is Arad Nir, Channel 2 Foreign Affairs Editor. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you for having me.
Arad, when you hear the words of the military establishment and the political establishment here in Israel, and just this morning I heard the communications minister saying Israel is prepared to attack back at the next rocket. The next rocket may be at 8:01 tomorrow morning.
This is the mere question. There is ongoing negotiations in Cairo nowadays. The problem with these negotiations is that there are no direct negotiations. It's the Egyptians that are going between the two rooms, between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Palestinians are all most probably in the same room, meaning the PA and Hamas are together on the same side. And both Israel and Egypt told the United States to hold its horses. The Undersecretary Bill Burns was on his way to Cairo. Apparently, he made a stop in Geneva, and it was realized that he's much more needed there with the negotiations with Iran, rather than coming all the way to Cairo without being wanted by, at least not by the Egyptian mediator and not by the Israeli side. Now, Israel tries to set the rules now. The general impression that comes out of Israel internally and externally is that the game is over. We've been told to come back to daily routine as usual, go back to your daily routine, they told us. The tanks are being pulled out in front of the TV cameras, obviously. There are some troops along the border with Gaza still, but the general perception is business as usual. The question is, will Hamas obey these rules? Now, we heard from various fractions of this very fractured organization that the ceasefire won't withhold after tomorrow morning if their demands won't be met. We don't know. So it remains to be seen whether Netanyahu will show some means of compromise, some willingness to compromise on any of the demands, which some of them are no doubtly outrageous and unacceptable by the Israeli side. Or maybe are we going into further confrontation? This remained to be seen.
Because some will say, it only takes one or a few Hamas militants to fire this one rocket, and they might do it to an open field just to show this kind of sense of seriousness on their part. Netanyahu, on his part, is also going to have to take into consideration political considerations that, yes, we've been after 29 days of combat, and now one rocket is one rocket too much.
The political rocket threatens Netanyahu much more than the actual rocket that will come out of Hamas. And this is
the international rocket.
And the international rockets have got no impression on Netanyahu for the time being, at least. I think it's wrong, but this is the way he behaves. He wants to be seen as if he does not succumb to any international pressure. And mind you, there is no direct international pressure. Because, President Obama can criticize Israel disproportionality, etc., but still the money for the money to finance Iron Dome still comes in. Mm-hmm. The ammunition still being sent. So there's no real pressure that comes not from the United States nor from Europe yet. There's a lot of harsh language, but nothing more than that. Netanyahu worries the language of Bennett much more than the language of Merkel, much more, or of Obama, and this is how he functions. I must state that should Netanyahu want to establish any wider solution out of this crisis, he does have the backing of the opposition. Right. The Labour would go with him. The left Meretz would go with him, would support him, would not let his own right to take him out of power. But I think that Netanyahu is not willing to do it. Netanyahu wants to set his own rules, and in order to set his own rules, he needs the other side to obey, and this remains to be seen whether the other side will obey Netanyahu's rules.
One will say perhaps that the only voice that we're hearing consistently from the beginning and up until now that has been not supportive of Israel is the voice of the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Yesterday we heard Obama just now speaking very much of support. UN Ban Ki-moon is still consistently not.
No, he's not convinced that Israel has done all in its power to avoid the continuous and repetitive hitting of the UN establishments in the Gaza Strip. Funny enough, in the very beginning of this conflict or of this confrontation, Ban Ki-moon visited Israel. He met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who showed him all the evidence that Israel has, etc. And Netanyahu was under the impression that he managed to convince Ban Ki-moon. Even when Ban Ki-moon was here, his language was extremely pro-Israel. Doesn't matter that the day before in Qatar he used the opposite language, but still, while in here he used a very pro-Israel language. Well, nonetheless, things have changed, and since then there has been these repetitive attacks of various UN shelters in the Gaza Strip. Well, I'm not a military general, but I think that it would have been wiser to avoid hitting these targets, even if they were used as undercover for the Hamas rocket launching machine, bearing in mind the minor extremely minor damage that these rockets did cause on the Israeli side,
Right.
maybe it would have been wiser to act wisely or to be wise rather than clever.
Or at least show the evidence as it comes out and not, wait for inquiries and so forth.
Yeah.
I want to now speak to Tal Ofer, European Jewish Parliament member, via Skype. You're in London. And also via telephone, Jonathan Sacherdati, our I-24 News London correspondent. Tal, I do want to start with you. We've been speaking a lot on this show throughout the operation about a growing trend of anti-Semitism, which has been perhaps seen as anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, but is actually is anti-Semitism, as I said. And now a new theater, a new event, a show of anti-Semitism is coming out. A London theater has backed out of hosting a Jewish film festival, not an Israeli film festival, a Jewish film festival, saying it's backed by the Israeli embassy and hence it cannot support it.
Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, the Tricycle Theatre in North London decided to cancel the UK Jewish Film Festival, which has been taking place there for the past 7 or 8 years. And the reason for them to do it is because of a really, really small donation which the Israeli embassy has been giving this Jewish festival for the past years. So they basically took both an anti-Semitic decision to boycott the festival because it's a UK Jewish festival on the ground, on political ground, because of Israel. But the reason why it is anti-Semitic, and the viewers would like to know, is because under the working definition of anti-Semitism, holding all the Jews as a community responsible or accountable because of the actions of the Israeli government is anti-Semitism and the EU working definition. So whatever they would try to say about the solidarity with Gaza or taking sides in this conflict, when you are boycotting a Jewish event because it's Jewish,
right,
it's anti-Semitic. There are no other explanations to it.
The Tricycle Theatre has stated in a response that it still wants to host the festival if it is no longer funded by the Israeli embassy, citing, of course, the current conflict as the reason for its backing out. That's unacceptable, of course, to the Jewish population in the UK and any festival goers in the UK for that matter.
Yes, of course, it is unacceptable. I think that the organizers of the festival themselves say that it will be unacceptable for them to be dictated how they are going to get the funding for this festival. And in addition to that, what I read in some papers, in The Guardian and in some other papers, is that the theatre itself tried to interfere in the program that the Jewish festival wanted to present. Although that, ironically, there were some movies included which will be quite critical of Israel. So they also artistically tried to intervene in the program, which is not something which should be overlooked when we're discussing it. But in terms of funding, if you brought up this issue, the really interesting thing is that this theatre is funded by a lot of great Jewish trusts and foundations and philanthropy. Mm-hmm. And what I've been doing since yesterday morning, I started a campaign contacting a lot of those funders and asking them, would you like to support such a theatre who is boycotting Jews? And one of the top 5 donors already confirmed to me yesterday that they stopped funding with immediate effect, which is a really great result. So this theatre relies on this funding, and if it doesn't want to have Jews or Jewish activities, then it shouldn't have a Jewish money either.
And this festival is due to start in November, so there is quite a lot of time until then. Do you expect this to roll out into the mainstream media in London, or is it still a very Jewish issue, very much part of the Jewish community?
I think it did roll out. I think that the Evening Standard had a piece yesterday, The Guardian, The Independent. So it was pretty much in all the big media, in the big papers, and there was last night on BBC Two a discussion with our leader from the Jewish Leadership Council, Simon Johnson. So it's quite a hot issue, considering the rise of anti-Semitism that we see in Europe, which unfortunately hasn't passed on us here in the UK. So it's still going to top the agenda. And today there is going to be a demonstration outside the theater by people who are really worried with what's happening here for the Jewish community.
I want to bring Jonathan Sacherdati into the conversation. Jonathan, we've been speaking periodically throughout the operation, of course, about anti-Semitic trends throughout Europe. We did cite, of course, many times Paris and Brussels as hotspots, and London perhaps is less. But the news coming out of London is probably most worrying now for British Jews, as it increasingly is more frequent than it has been before.
What's happened here with the Tricycle Theatre is a good example of the British style of anti-Semitism. So while we're not necessarily seeing the bigger riots on the street against Jews, we are seeing organisations like the Tricycle Theatre, which is very happy to accept large amounts of UK government money, for example, £725,000 last year from the British state, despite its activities abroad, its so-called illegal wars and the like. But when it comes to a Jewish film festival, they've made it clear that they would not have the festival hosted in the cinema unless the Jewish Film Festival cut itself off from the Israeli embassy. So I think that many Jews I've spoken to here are of the opinion that this is definitely an anti-Semitic act, despite the protestations of the artistic director into Ruba Singham, who insists that she's not an anti-Semite because she says so. But many Jews seem to be disagreeing. And the 43-year-old artistic director, who's been in place for 2 years apparently, has insisted that she wouldn't have allowed the film festival to take place were it to be accepting money from any side in the current dispute. Those are their words, which is somewhat ridiculous because the idea of Hamas Arts Fund perhaps sponsoring a Jewish film festival really shows how idiotic that particular line of argument is. So when I asked them for an interview to clarify some of these points, I'm afraid they were reluctant to answer any questions, saying they would get back to me. Asking for a sit-down interview, they rejected the request altogether. So it seems that they're definitely worried about the coverage they're getting. And as Tal said just there, this isn't small news. It was in the Evening Standard yesterday where they had a 2-page spread interview with Ruba Singham. Right. It was on Newsnight last night, the BBC's flagship current affairs daily news program. So this isn't going to just go away. And the Jewish Film Festival seems to have taken a principled position in responding that it wouldn't give up the relatively small amount of money that the Israeli embassy gave it and has always given it in order to put on this Jewish cultural event. And why should it? Why should a theatre in Kilburn dictate to Jews what their relationship with the state of Israel should be? That's what people are saying to me. I spoke to people on the street around the tricycle yesterday, and one Jewish man told me he was in no doubt this was an act of anti-Semitism.
We'll definitely be looking towards the development of that story. Jonathan Sacherdati, thank you for joining us from London. Tal Ofer, European Jewish Parliament member, thank you also for joining us from London. And we, of course, we will be following that story very closely. Gabi Tartakovsky, you're in studio with some headlines.
Yes, we spoke a lot about the current world leaders. Now it's time for the elders to speak their minds. Foreign Policy published an op-ed piece by former U.S. President Jimmy Carter under the title How to Fix It, meaning the Gaza conflict and the entire situation.
Yeah, that's such a Carter statement, just,
yes,
stating that there is a way to fix it.
There is a way to fix it. Well, he fixed Israel and Egypt relations during his time in office.
But since then, his popularity, I think, in this region has deeply decreased.
Yes, he published a best-selling book called Palestine, Democracy, Not Apartheid, and then he clarified that he didn't suggest that Israel is an apartheid state. Now he tries to balance the situation again, saying that Hamas should be recognized as a legitimate political player, that Hamas made a major concession when agreeing to the reconciliation agreement with President Abbas back in April, and there is no excuse for deliberate attacks on civilians in this conflict. These are war crimes, and he emphasizes this is true for both sides, both Hamas and the IDF. Now,
this is going straight across U.S. policy, foreign policy. Hamas is a terrorist according to U.S. government lists and so forth. So for Jimmy Carter to come out and say that, it's probably earth-shattering.
Indeed.
In terms of the Americans.
Indeed, but President Carter, interestingly enough, does not wish to promote the aid of U.S. in the region. He emphasizes the EU, stating that the EU should allow free transport of people and goods in Gaza and should be more involved in the region rather than the U.S. alone.
What else do you have?
Well, moving on to another Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Elie Wiesel. The New York Observer reports that London Times rejects Elie Wiesel advertisement condemning Hamas.
Right, and this is something that has been published in other papers.
Yes,
right?
including in the New York Observer as well. This is an ad co-written by Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor and one of the most important writers about the subject. The ad condemns Hamas' use of children, use of their entire policy of human shells, saying the Jewish people have foregone these tactics of victimizing children. Hamas still does so. The London Times said they feel the opinion being expressed is too strong and too forcefully made and will cause concern amongst significant members of Time readers.
Cause concern. Okay.
And cause concern. Now, the ad is being sponsored by an organization called This World, headed by Rabbi Shmuley Botich. The rabbi actually offered the London Times to revisit the ad so that it can be published in the newspaper, but they still declined to do so.
And it's important to note that London Times was only the first paper that rejected it. It had been published in many.
It had been published
mostly
in
American, right?
Mostly
paper?
American. New York Times, Washington Post, all the major media outlets had no problem with issuing it as a full spread ad.
Indeed. All right. Well, we'll keep on following that as well. Last.
Now it's time to pick up the mess Hamas has made. Walla reports efforts to collect rocket shells begin. The Israeli police and IDF begin tracking rocket shells nationwide. There are over 3,300 rockets that were fired over Israel during the month of fighting. At least 2,500 landed in open spaces, and now the operation begins to track them all down. They use Iron Dome data to trace them and urge the public not to touch the rocket shells and not to collect them. We've seen that one Tel Avivian resident rushed over to grab a rocket shell and then sell it on eBay. So they forcefully encourage people not to do so and call the proper authorities.
I was about to say, you can just look at my Facebook feed and you'll see where the rocket shells are exactly in people's homes and so forth. Maybe already in eBay. And
let the professionals deal with it, please.
Indeed. Quickly, one last one?
One last thing, Ynet reports Spanish hoop fans called for ejecting Maccabi from the EuroLeague. Maccabi Tel Aviv is the EuroLeague's champion, but fans representing 7 Spanish basketball teams, including Barcelona, will submit an official request to eject Maccabi Tel Aviv. They say simply, we don't want to play with blood-soaked basketballs.
Or someone sportsy will say they just don't want them to win again. That's my...
Yes. 10 years ago, when...
Well, we'll come back in a second. Thank you, Gabi, for joining us. Thank you, Arad. We'll be back after this break. Thank you for staying with us here at I-24 News Morning Edition. We're in a special broadcast, of course, this morning. It's day 31 of the Operation Protective Edge, and just a day before the 72-hour truce is due to end. With me now in studio is I-24 News sports host and presenter, Jonathan Regev. Jonathan, we're going to speak some sports.
Believe it or not, sports. We're back.
We're back. But it all has to do, of course, with the operation. It's still an underlying theme, if you will, for many of the different parts of Israeli society. What do you want to start with?
Absolutely. Look, European qualifiers in basketball will start this Sunday. Israel will play Montenegro. The game was supposed to be played in Israel, but Israel's home game will be held in Cyprus. At the moment, FIBA, the International Basketball Association, does not allow for games to be held in Israel. So therefore, the upcoming game against Montenegro, it's this Sunday night. It will be held in Cyprus. It's a big disappointment for me and for any other Israeli sports fan, but I have to say something a bit unpopular perhaps. I can somewhat understand those people refusing to coming to Israel now. You know, I know, the people around us know that it's perfectly safe right now when there's a ceasefire to say the truth, it was also practically safe when rockets came in. We know that.
But the Backstreet Boys didn't come either, so...
If you cannot convince the Backstreet Boys, how can you convince basketball players?
It's very hard to do so.
If I was a basketball player from Montenegro, I would say I have to come to Tel Aviv on Saturday, play on Sunday, when the previous Sunday, sirens were heard, rockets were coming in, and people were going to shelters. That happened. It did happen. So, as disappointing as it is, I can understand that. It's not only basketball that's affected. First, this coming game, the home game against Montenegro on Sunday will be played in Cyprus. There are 2 more games later in the month of August, and they were also, FIBA, the Basketball Association, already said those games will also have to be held outside of Israel against the Netherlands and against Bulgaria. So basically, Israel will play all their 3 games away from home. It's not the first time it has happened. It's very, very disappointing every time. Basketball is not the only sports affected. Football, the European qualifiers for the Champions League, for the Europa League have begun. And 3 Israeli teams already lost in their competition. None of them, Maccabi Tel Aviv, Hapoel Tel Aviv, and Hapoel Beersheva, none of them played their home games in Israel. Is that the reason why they lost? You can never know. You can never know. But take Maccabi Tel Aviv, for example. They played in Cyprus. Their, again, home game in Cyprus. They needed to win by 1 goal against a team from Slovenia. The game ended with a 2-2 draw. Had there been a different outcome here in Israel, you can never know. But obviously, it's something that affects. Absolutely, home court advantage is significant.
But if you also look at the short history of Israelis trying to qualify for these leagues, it's not always been...
absolutely.
I'm trying to sting the...
Absolutely. I'll just put it this way. We do not know what would have happened had these games been held in Israel.
I'll give you guys that, yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that those games were held away. There's another game today. The Kiryat Shmona, the team from the north, had to play in their home turf today. They play in Cyprus. Tennis, the other sports affected. For the first time in 18 years, a big tournament was supposed to be held here in Israel at the Ramat Sharon Tennis Center.
Right.
Big expectation. That is not going to happen. Yesterday, the ATP that runs the tennis tournaments around the world announced that this tournament will be moved, will not be played in Israel. Before we complain and we say, oh, they're all anti-Semites, how come they're taking things away? We have to remember one thing. 6 weeks before the tournament is played, everything has to be set up, meaning you have to know the players are coming, you have to know that everything is safe. Six weeks before the tournament in mid-September is now.
Right.
And right now, as much as we hate to say that, we're still in a somewhat unstable situation. You said it yourself. The ceasefire is due to end tomorrow.
Right.
Do we really know what is going to happen after that? We don't know.
Not at all.
Still, some good news.
Okay.
2 big events, the 2 biggest events that are coming up. Israel's football match against Belgium in the Euro 2016 qualifiers, and the Davis Cup tie against Argentina. The football match is supposed to be held in Jerusalem at the Teddy Stadium on September the 9th. The decision about that game will be taken probably next week. As it seems, if everything stays quiet, this game will be held as planned in Jerusalem. If that happens, then the Davis Cup tie against Argentina will also be held in Israel.
Right.
Let's just hope.
A quick question here is, of course, not only the fans are upset. Is there economic implications? Are people losing money because?
Absolutely. If for these European qualifiers in basketball, people bought tickets for games that were supposed to be held here in Tel Aviv,
and there's no reimbursement.
There's no reimbursement, and if they want to go, if they really want to watch the game, they have to travel to Cyprus, buy another ticket. So obviously, there are a lot of implications. People already bought tickets for this tennis tournament.
Right.
Which was supposed to, again, almost 20 years since the last ATP tournament was held here in Israel. Big deal. People bought tickets. Big problem. So just let's hope that this is it and sports will be back soon, because it hurts everybody.
We're going to speak about economic implications without not only in sports, but also, of course, within the Israeli public. With me now is the Israeli Knesset member of the Labour Party and a member of the Israeli Parliament Finance Committee, a member of Knesset Michal Biran. Thank you for joining us this morning. So obviously, this is something that we knew from other operations in Israel. It's always has economic implications that are actually much more long-term than perhaps that we think here. It's not only about what's happening now, it's what's going to happen in the next year. And businesses...
Especially in
tourism and other areas.
Tourism is just one field, but what another?
In some areas, basically, when the operation it will be over, they'll, factories, basically they'll go back to routine. But some areas like tourism, as you heard about the sports, people are canceling their vacation, their travels here for like a year in advance. They won't hurry back to schedule them. Some of the implications are going to be really long term.
But even the businesses within Israel, there's no really way to be prepared for this kind of operation. There's no really way to recuperate from this kind of operation because the damage, quote unquote, has been done.
That's true. Something like the Israeli government was smart in the fact that there is a compensation fund that they put money in it every year. Every time you buy a house or any kind of real estate, some of it, I think 20% of the money is going to the compensation fund for any kind of operation and a military
conflict and so forth. Right, which happens quite a lot. So I mean,
and that's why
used.
They're putting money there all the time, even years that you don't have anything. So you won't have to take it out of your normal budget. Okay, so that's a good thing, and we are prepared to compensate, but they don't want to compensate all the businesses that are further than the 40 kilometers range.
Right,
and that's a problem. Because, well, obviously, a factory in Rishon LeZion maybe wasn't hurt that much. People could go to work, but obviously nobody went to sit in a coffee shop. Nobody did a big wedding. Nobody did a celebration for kids. Like all those.
And it's a trickle-down effect. It's a domino effect. If it hurts one factory in Rishon, it hurts many different areas.
And I think, by the way, that even things like buying a new refrigerator, people were so not into that. They were just sitting near the television, watching online all the time, all the updates, like even things that are not supposed to be related to the situation were actually related. And we had a struggle in the finance committee, and we had some success. We managed to have slightly bigger advances. How do you call it? Advance payments.
Advance payments.
Also, you call it advance payment. We're already after a month of the situation, and small businesses, they have to pay salary, they have to pay their
rent and national insurance, and it doesn't end. So the question really is, every time during, and this is a bigger, maybe philosophical question for you. We know, of course, the 2011 social protests were raging on the summer of 2011, and since then they've kind of died down. Yes, there is talk about it, there is discourse, but every time an operation comes up like this, and this one was, of course, a bigger one, and it may still continue, the idea of social justice and social welfare for all of Israel's citizens is put maybe second or third or maybe last on the government's agenda. Is this the case this year as well?
What I think what's really interesting is what's going to happen next month. Because obviously when people are paying in the most awful way in their lives, young guys not coming back home, families torn apart, I think in this atmosphere, nobody's feeling okay to complain about the economical consequences of this operation. But I think that if everything will be over now, people are going to wake up next week, the week after, and see their bank account and see that. I don't remember that. I think 80% of the Israelis, there was a statistic about it, cannot hold, the household cannot hold an unpredicted expend of 10,000 shekels.
Right.
So now just
living by month for month.
Yeah. So just now, and they were talking about you have to fix a car or something that like a big thing. Now think about it. All those people that were hurt from this operation, how are they going to survive? They're going to look at their bank account, and I hope that there will be a protest. I think there should be. I think there is money. There's 5.5 billion shekels in the compensation fund. Obviously, you don't have to compensate a place in Rishon LeZion like you compensate Sderot, but you compensate some.
But it needs to be at least raised on the agenda. Member of Knesset Biran, I want to just have a member of Knesset Nachman Shai, also from your party, of course, to join this conversation. Member of Knesset Shai, thank you for joining us.
You're most welcome. Good morning. Thank you, and shalom, Michal.
We're of course speaking about the economic implications, and one of the biggest decisions that the government is going to have to make or going to decide is whether to move the rhetoric, even the label of this protective edge, from operation to war. What's your stance on that?
Well, I turned to the Supreme Court earlier this week on Sunday and asked to label this operation as a war, since there's no doubt, I think, at least now, that this war went over the usual 40 kilometers line. Rockets landed in Tel Aviv and northern Tel Aviv and in Haifa, and the entire country, most of the country was impacted by the war. And so I think that when the government considers compensation and how to make the country, the economic run again, they should also pay attention to areas which are beyond this line.
What is the hesitance within the government to call it a war? Is it an economic decision? Is it a political decision? What would you attribute the resistance?
Okay, first of all, we made their life easier. We said that we don't want to interfere with any political, diplomatic, or military considerations, which exist anyhow. Mm-hmm. But we said we would like to focus only on the economic and social aspect of this, because for the time being, as long as the Home Front Command decided that only the 40-kilometer zone is the zone that was hurt more than others, that means that the government will focus on them. And we say just the opposite, not just the opposite. We say go forward and be more flexible. And by the way, let me remind our viewers that in 2006, a colleague of mine, Yossi Beilin, turned to the Supreme Court in the same way, also asking that the military operation will be defined as a war. The Supreme Court turned him down, and then a few weeks later, the government went forward and declared Operation a war and compensated the businesses beyond the 40 or whatever kilometers line it was. So I think that it just should show flexibility. I'm not saying that every business and everyone should be compensated, but there's no doubt, and I just follow what my colleague Michal said, there are people that need money urgently in order to return to normal life, and especially small businesses. And so the government should be much more flexible and willing to help. Let me tell you that in 2006, 3.5 billion shekels were allocated, and now the government is talking just on 800 million shekels. Right. And I think they should be really more understandable to the situation and open their pockets. The money exists, there's no doubt about it. And by the way, the money will come back because that's the way it is. The more businesses will be reopened, more business will be done.
And more prosperity.
And more taxes will be paid, no doubt about it.
And a member of Knesset Shai, I want to also ask you, under your previous hat as a part of the IDF, of course, and advisors in many of that sense to international diplomacy, isn't there also, besides the, of course, enormous economic implication of changing it to a war, also an implication for Israeli society? I mean, this is a society that went through now a month of rockets on civilian population, lost more soldiers than it has in the past, and so forth. Is there also not an emotional aspect of calling it a war? Just as you said, the Second Lebanon War was mostly done the same.
There is, but just ask the people what it was, and they will all tell you it was a war.
Right.
These are today's war. They are short and very intensive. And by the way, they are in the context when we discuss, that's what my PhD is all about and my book and everything, is that it's a low-intensity conflict in general, but in this low-intensity conflict, there are peaks once in a while, and the peak is a very intensive one. And this is, by the way, Israel is trying to handle it. The first hit, the second hit will be so intensive, so the enemy will decide to stop the war. That's the way it is. So it has implications on the Palestinians, or the people of Gaza, but it has also implications on us. And there's no doubt that by calling it a war, they will just make justice to something which really happened, and everyone will tell you. I just heard the Chief of Staff yesterday describing the situation and spoke about it as a war. And the Chief of Staff should be careful. If it was just a military operation, it means a military operation. He said war and war and war. And and I'm now following him in this way.
Member of Knesset Nachman Shai from the Labour Party, thank you for joining us this morning. Member of Knesset Biran, taking off, of course, from what Member of Knesset Shai said, it's also an emotional aspect, and we saw, of course, in previous conflicts, bigger, all kinds of societal initiatives. People donating goods, people hosting companies from the south to work in their Tel Aviv offices, and so forth. Do we have to put everything with the government, or is there also a societal kind of, maybe it's this Israeli kind or Jewish value of helping each other, and that's that?
Well, in Hebrew you call it tzedek versus tzedakah, which means charity
Justice
versus justice.
Right.
I think that charity should be only extra. Mm-hmm. It should not be the basic stuff. And I think at this operation, this is what we had. We had previous operations where citizens and society were sending basic stuff that the government should pay for and should provide food and equipment for the soldiers. This time there was nothing like that, and the extra thing, the warm schnitzel, then in the sandwich. This is something that this is the charity. This is the civil society. This is something that warms the heart of the soldiers. And I think that in this operation, basically, the division between the was okay.
It was okay, maybe because they did learn from the mistakes of the past. Mm-hmm. But another mistake of the past, and this is maybe it's not a mistake, but another big division will be, of course, about the budget. And this is we're talking about small businesses, we're talking about economic implications for tourism, but it's also going to kind of impact the budget for the next few years. People are not going to perhaps go to the streets when they say we can have tunnels being dug underneath us. We need to give all our money now to the defense establishment.
I don't think that the lack of budget was the problem here. Mm-hmm. They knew about the tunnels. They miscalculated the threat. I think people that's their main agenda will investigate, and I think that's not the end of it. But nobody said no. We need to have another $1 billion to treat the tunnels. There was, I think, on the finance committee, not on this committee, but I don't think that was the issue. And if the finance minister is lacking money, we have 2.4 totally wasted money that he wants to give away in the discount, the VAT discount
for new apartments.
For new apartments that everybody think, it's going to be so great. No, only very few people are going to get it, and eventually it's not. There's no one economist that think that it's actually going to take down the price of apartments. So if they need the money,
they know where to get it.
Yeah.
But isn't the Israeli public, this is not the first time that we're arguing over the defense budget. It's always going to be an issue. Doesn't this operation or war, if it becomes a war, change that? It's going to actually push more people. People are fearful. They won't remember, the fact that they can't finish the month with a full salary and so forth.
You're right, and that will be our, as opposition, that's going to be our next struggle, I think, to remind that I think what's an actual threat to our existence as a Jewish democratic state of Israel is not the Hamas. The Hamas is not going to destroy the state of Israel. It's annoying, it's dangerous, we pay with life, we pay with security, we pay with children starting to wet their beds at 10 and 12 because of the trauma. There's a lot of, but they're not going to destroy the state of Israel. But our internal, and we just had Tisha B'Av, and we're talking about Sinat Chinam, the
hatred, yeah.
Yeah, they said that that's the most dangerous thing, I think, in Israel. When you say, people already forgot it, but what we had with the murder of Muhammad Abu Khder, people burning a person alive because he's Arab, our foreign affairs minister calling the citizen of Israel to boycott the businesses of Israeli Arabs. I think when you ask me, and this is what I'll have to convince the public, the internal struggles are the ones that can actually threaten our existence here.
much more than the external ones.
Yeah.
And you do mention, of course, that you're part of the opposition and you'll have to convince the public. Now is probably the most the time when everyone's going to look towards the opposition, not only on Netanyahu's role, but also the security cabinet's role throughout the operation. When you looked at polls throughout the operation, 87% overwhelmingly supported the operation, including the opposition.
Including the Labour Party.
Right.
And this is why you won't hear us say, why did you do that? We thought that we had no choice. We had to go to this operation. I think Bibi Netanyahu, I'm not a fan, and this is an understatement. Okay. But I think they waited until they needed to be sure that you actually need to put soldiers in. And I think it was basically pretty responsible. And this is why we're very, we're trying to be a very
quieter opposition.
Not quieter, just to take each subject as it is. Okay, when the government is doing okay, we will back there.
Right.
We'll back the government. But in so many subjects we disagree, and then we'll make the hell out of it.
Well, we'll be watching the opposition closely. Member of Knesset Michal Biran of the Labour Party, thank you for joining us this morning. We're going straight to Michal Divon, our I-24 news correspondent. You're on the Israeli-Gaza border this morning. What's the latest from there?
Hi, Yael. Back to normalcy. Well, it seems like that is the direction. We've been seeing some of the farmers driving by near the border, where not long ago this was a completely restricted area. Where we're standing at the moment, 1 kilometer from the northern Gaza Strip, the community Nativ HaSara is based a lot of it on agricultural economy. And therefore, the greenhouses you can see behind me are now starting to work once again. For a few weeks, there was an absolute prohibition to enter these fields. And of course, this created quite an economic hit. Now, this is also the same place where one of the agricultural workers, one of the farmers, was hit and killed by a mortar shell. So this community really represents the risks and some of the tragic parts of this operation. One of the tunnels was actually found and also destroyed right in this community. We'll go there a little later to show you. So there are both economical and, of course, psychological implications which are felt very much here in this place closest to the border. Hopefully there will be a recuperation and a very important and interesting point that one of the residents said here this morning is that the future of both the Gaza citizens and the citizens of southern Israel specifically are intertwined. They share the same fate. They feel the same explosions because of this close proximity. And so the only solution to their eyes, at least whoever we spoke to, is economic and political.
Michal Divon there on the I-24 News correspondent on the Israeli-Gaza border. Thank you for joining us. You will, of course, as you said, be updating us throughout the day. Now with me in studio is Oded Grober, I-24 News host of The Bloggers and The Culture magazine. Good morning. We've been speaking a lot about the implications within Israel, and it's there's going to be implications for, I think, much longer term than we even think. But there were good things happening during...
Well, it depends what you look at. During this operation in this last month, we, on the Bloggers magazine, we really did examine the situation from various angles, and we looked at a few things. We looked at the Arab minority within Israel. We looked at reserve duty. Look at all sorts of, what
niche
wasn't,
parts of society.
Yeah, exactly. And trying to show our viewers what it's like living in Israel, not necessarily on the front line, but life in Israel during an operation like this. And this Saturday we'll air a show that'll just pick and choose some of our best stories from the operation. I don't know if we'll get a chance to have a taste of one now, but I'll let me tell you about it at least till in the meantime. There's one of the stories we ran was about a mixed Jewish-Arab kindergarten in Haifa, which is a mixed city, one of the few mixed cities in Israel, and one that is considered the mixed city that works in a way. But even there, this sort of kindergarten is quite rare. which is unfortunate. But still, when you see it, it's beautiful, and it gives sort of a hope of a better future. But even there, you see that there are problems, because even though the kids go in and the kindergarten works in both languages, people don't really hang out after school. People are these sort of relationships are not necessarily built. Do we have time to watch a clip?
We're going to see it as we continue speaking, but the coexistence, as you said, is something that perhaps sometimes we take for granted in times of relative quiet. And during, as you say, war or operation, we're gonna
still
figure
undecided.
That one out. It's obviously, it impacts everyone, even young children.
Certainly, it impacts everyone, and it brings out a lot of the problems that are buried under the surface in normal days, and then it's out there and it's obvious, because a lot of the Arab parents that we talked to, and we also had some guests in the studio. We had Janan Bsul. She's an Arab student and journalist who written beautifully during this operation about life as an Arab Israeli, and we had Ari Remez, an activist from Haifa. And they spoke about the problem, the frustration, the discrimination
that is automatically
in everyday life here. We just heard about it. Lieberman calling Israelis to boycott the businesses of Arab Israelis, and it's a real problem. We mentioned Said Kashua, an Israeli Arab author who left Israel now and written beautifully about it. And we discussed whether Arabs would get up and go. The answer, by the way, is no.
No, and you'll be able to see most of it, all of this, on Saturday on the Bloggers Magazine. Oded Grover, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
That's it for today. We're going to go now to the I-24 News Desk for some headlines. I'll be here tomorrow. I'm Yael Listener-Levy with more I-24 News Morning Edition. We'll see you tomorrow.